So I have to be honest about something. Sometimes I struggle with whether I should respond to a particular video. If I feel like an apologist with a small platform is saying something outrageous to provoke us into giving them exposure, I'll generally ignore them. And the video we're about to see today clearly fits that category. So should I be doing this? I'm not sure. But it's already gotten more exposure than I'm going to give it, and with many times the views of any of the channel's other videos, it has a fair reach. And I think it deserves to be called out for using this reach to encourage a horrible form of bullying packaged as a philosophical proposition. So I guess here we are.
Hello! Today I'm going to give an argument with the conclusion that all atheists should delete their channels and stop criticizing Christianity.
That sounds like about the most Christian thing to want everybody else to do.
Now the point of this video isn't actually to cause that to happen. Rather, I just think that there's actually a strong argument for that conclusion. And I'm honestly just curious to see where an atheist would disagree with that argument's train of logic.
And I'm honestly happy to oblige by showing you.
They obviously have to if they're going to keep their channel up.
Whoa, let's slow down and see if your argument's even worth anything before jumping ahead to insinuations that we should need to defend still having channels. Now I know this part can sound a little lighthearted, and he said he's not actually trying to get us to take them down. But this does feed into an incredibly poisonous attitude Christians have about atheists who express themselves. As I explained in one of my Dumb Things videos, a lot of them think that while we have a right to non-belief, they should to some extent or another be able to demand that we keep it to ourselves. This translates not only into a general disdain for atheists who have the audacity to open their mouths, but into Christians overtly and repeatedly asking things like why bother talking about a religion I don't believe in, or criticizing me for causing harm, be it in the form of taking away people's hope, undermining their foundation of morality, or as in this case endangering them to hell, just because I honestly articulate my point of view. This is nothing more than a crass and honestly appalling form of bullying. And that might sound like overstatement considering the fact that Apologetics Squared is not actually trying to make me delete my channel and has no way to pressure me into silence. But his suggestion does not exist in a vacuum. It's being added to and exacerbating an environment where this form of bullying is carried out by people who can put such pressure on others. I can't tell you how many people write to me saying they're afraid to even reveal themselves as non-believers, much less utter a peep about their opinions, because they're surrounded by people who have the financial leverage, social leverage, or just straight-up authority to make their lives hell for it. And while I can laugh off people who say, stop talking about atheism because you're taking away people's hope, they don't have that luxury. So I'm going to get really testy when anybody feeds into this culture of bullying people into silence, even if it's done in a lighthearted or naive way. Because regardless of Apologetics Squared's intentions, this video will add to the vocabulary and mindset of those who want to and can shut others up. Now, is he responsible for their actions? No. But the kind of sincerious suggestion he's making is at best not great. Now, I'm not going to say that he shouldn't be able to express his opinion, since one side of the argument suggesting this about the other is already too many, but I am going to push back against it. And if I can somehow find any weaknesses in his argument, for example, if it only takes him 45 seconds to reveal that the entire thing rests on an assertion, I'll be very happy to point it out.
Now let's start by looking at Pascal's wager. We're trying to maximize utility, which means we're trying to see which courses of action maximizes good for us. The decision we're looking at is whether we should wager on Christianity. The amount of utility we get by wagering on Christianity is the product of the probability of Christianity being true and the utility received by being a faithful Christian, which is infinity because a Christian will go to heaven.
Now, did you catch that? He just stated, as a fact, that the utility of being a Christian is infinity because the Christian goes to heaven. But here's the problem. I don't believe it, and he hasn't done anything to demonstrate it. Yet this flatly unverified assertion is all he bases his argument on. So if he wants to know where I disagree with him, here it is. If that needs to be pointed out. But backing up a bit, there are all kinds of problems with using this multiply far-fetched odds by infinity thing to make a point about utility. There can be good reasons to choose a safer bet over a long shot with a big payoff, especially, if the long shot doesn't even have established odds and seems implausible. And there are all kinds of issues with trying to use a concept like infinity in mathematical operations. But even setting that aside, we haven't as much as established that there's an infinity to multiply his claim by in the first place. All we have to work with are his claims about Christianity and his claim of infinity. And you can't multiply by someone's claim of infinity any more than you can add their promise to pay back money they owe you to your bank account. Everything on the table is an assertion, and no matter how you play around with assertions, no matter what mathematical operations you try to do between them, they don't get you anywhere. You need to build from a verifiable or at least agreed upon premise. You can't just fix the low odds of a claim by adding an additional claim that believing it has infinite utility. But that's exactly what he's trying to do. Now there's a little trick here, which is that they could counter that if Christianity is true then you get to go to heaven, makes infinite reward an outcome of the claim being true in the same way that if you draw a royal flush on this hand you'll win $1 billion, makes the $1 billion an outcome of getting the hand. And you can weigh the odds of the hand against the reward of the $1 billion that would result from it, right? So why can't you weigh the odds of Christianity against the reward of eternal life that would result from it? But this is actually a poor comparison, because despite the similarity in phrasing, these are very different statements that are based on and establish totally different things. The second one references a verified fact that you'll win the prize if you get the hand, and you'd never take the proposition seriously if the terms weren't clearly established. Or at least I'd hope you wouldn't. Before you'd make a wager, someone would need to demonstrate to your satisfaction that the money existed, that getting a royal flush would obligate them to pay you, and that the mechanics of the game would be clearly understood and fair. The statement only has meaning because it's describing a verified fact that a certain outcome of the hand will set a certain process into motion. By contrast, the statement, if Christianity is true then you get to go to heaven, does not refer back to such a verifiable process, since nobody can show you heaven or factually verify that being a Christian will get you there. Thus it's nothing more than a self-referencing description of Christian doctrine. Seriously, think about why the statement is true. It's because, and only because, Christianity includes the teaching that Christians go to heaven. So it's literally just saying, if the teaching that Christians go to heaven is true, then it's true that Christians go to heaven. It's a mere tautology that pretends to establish infinite utility through nothing more than its own choice of words. It helps to see that there are two things at work in a legitimate bet. One, the terms of the wager, and two, the thing you're wagering on. For a bet to make sense, these two need to be totally distinct from each other, with the prize and the rules being guaranteed under certain terms, and all the uncertainty confined to the specific event you're wagering on. The moment the uncertainty even began bleeding over into the terms of the game, everything would become messy and arguably incoherent. At the very least, the person proposing the bet would be taking advantage of you, and I'll get to a real-life example of this later. If someone just tried to assert the existence of the prize in the rules of the game, or say their very existence were conditional on whether you won the game, I'd hope you see them for the sleazy con artists they were. This is the core problem with Apologetics Squared's proposed wager. It simply asserts the reward of heaven and the rules of getting there, or at best, and this whole last part was me going out of my way to steelman his argument for him, makes them conditional upon the very wager they're supposed to provide the structure for. That was a lot to say by this point, but everything he says from here rests on this simple assertion, and it was worth taking the time to drive home how empty his core point is. Basically, he's trying to argue that we shouldn't question his religion's claims because of what his religion claims happens when you question it. Keep this in mind as we go on, because no matter what other details he goes into, no matter what objections he covers or rebuts, the whole thing is pointless because it all depends on a single assertion of Christian doctrine.
Plus, the product of the probability that Christianity is false and the utility received by being a deluded Christian. That totals to infinity. The amount of utility we get by not wagering on Christianity is the product of the probability of Christianity being true and the utility received by being an incorrect non-Christian, plus the product of the probability that Christianity is false and the utility received by being a correct non-Christian. That totals to negative infinity. So the action which is better for us is obviously to wager on Christianity. That's the argument in a nutshell.
Yeah, Great. But since this does nothing but further describe an assertion, let's just move on.
I have severe problems with this argument. Firstly, there are other religions besides Christianity. A Muslim could just as effectively use Pascal's wager to argue for Islam.
So I get this as one way of showing Pascal's wager's futility, but I've always thought it was weird as a major objection. I mean, if a guy came to my house and said for $10 I'll sell you this rock that will protect your family from dragons, my objection would not be, well, there's also a guy who wants to sell me a stick that will protect me from wizards, and since I only have $10 I can't secure the utility of both dragon protection and wizard protection. My objection would be that both of these suggestions fly in the face of everything I know about intelligently assessing what kinds of dangers might befall me and how I avoid them. So I'm not going to give either of them my money just because they can vocalize the possibility of some far-fetched danger and solution. Similarly, I don't reject Pascal's wager because Christianity won't protect me against the silly threats of other religions. I reject it because the mere ability of Christians to vocalize things about infinite utility shouldn't compel me to act on its own silly threats. I'm going to blow through the rest of these theoretical objections because they're pretty irrelevant given the fact that the infinite utility of heaven is just an assertion. I wonder why he never foresaw or addressed that objection.
Secondly, wagering on Christianity appears to involve the actual belief that Christianity is true. But whether I like it or not, I am not convinced by the arguments for Christianity. Therefore, it seems that I simply am unable to wager on Christianity. And even if I could, it seems immoral or otherwise impermissible to change my beliefs on the basis of how much it helps me, rather than on the basis of evidence. And another point, would God even want me to believe in him purely on the basis of selfish motivations? That seems hardly likely. So Pascal's wager, despite its attempts to push me towards Christianity, ultimately fails. I actually think that those are valid criticisms of Pascal's wager, and I could totally understand why it may fail to push you to Christianity. However, it seems that Pascal's wager can stop an atheist from pulling people out of Christianity.
Why does he think our channels are designed to pull people out of Christianity? Most of my viewers are already non-Christian or doubting, and my goal is to help them process their experiences and put their existing doubts into words. So his argument that I delete my channel is based not only on an assertion of Christian doctrine, but on his own misunderstanding of the point of my channel.
Here's my thinking. How much utility does a Christian have on average? Well, it's a product of the probability that Christianity is true and the infinite reward they would get for being a Christian. Coolio. Now, if they deconvert, how much utility do they have now? Well, they do have some utility. I mean, they don't need to get up early on Sunday mornings or anything, but their utility is now merely finite.
I wonder what Jesus would think of his suggestion that taking up your cross is as easy as getting up on Sunday. We all know there's a lot more people are asked to give up, whether part of their identities, freedom to ask certain questions, behavior the religion labels as sins, and so on. And I guess it's fine to give these things up if Christianity is true, but let's not pretend the stakes are so low that you might as well just do it anyway even if it's not true. Now I don't care much that I heard this jab from him. What I care about is, for example, young atheists in the midst of a complicated, painful deconversion process who are being pressured not to be themselves or think for themselves, while being treated like they're just so lazy and stupid they just want to get out of church. This is a degrading way of approaching people who disagree with you. It's too pointless to have value as a joke, and it exacerbates situations where vulnerable atheists are being viewed and talked to in very hurtful ways. I'll give Apologetics Squared the benefit of assuming he's just naive, but I really hope he grows out of this utterly childish lack of insight into anybody outside his religion.
They lost that on-average infinite utility that they previously had. So the transition from Christian to non-Christian has a net utility on average of negative infinity.
Okay, so true story. A few years ago, my grandpa was always getting several letters a day from people saying he had won some giant sweepstakes or another. And of course all he had to do to claim it was send in like $20 to $30 for processing. Now this might sound sketchy, but when you think about it, the utility of getting the giant prize was higher than the utility of the tiny processing fee, right? Yet somehow my dad and I kept urging my grandpa not to participate. Weird, huh? I guess maybe we just didn't understand how to maximize utility. But okay, I know this isn't a great analogy yet, because of course long odds can really eat into the utility of a, say, $1 million prize. I mean, if the chances of the prize being real are, say, 1 in a trillion, then the net utility of the $1 million against the odds of winning is far less than a penny, so he's better off keeping his $30. So, I guess the problem with people mailing him this trash must be that they aren't offering enough money to make the utility worthwhile. Yeah, that's got to be the issue. So let's say they caught wind of our objection and sent Grandpa a letter saying he'd won infinity dollars. How about we plug this scenario into Apologetics Squared's reasoning and see where it gets us?
Here's my thinking. How much utility does a
Person who accepts the prize offer
have on average? Well, it's a product of the probability that
the claim they won the prize
is true and the infinite reward they would get for
claiming the prize.
Coolio. Now, if they
Reject the prize,
how much utility do they have now? Well, they do have some utility. I mean, they
still have their $30.
but their utility is now merely finite. They lost that on average infinite utility that they previously had. So the transition from
Accepting the prize
to
throwing the envelope in the trash
has a net utility on average of negative infinity.
Of course, I changed some of the words, but the thinking is the same. If we accept his reasoning that the mere assertion of infinite reward by Christianity makes it the best option regardless of the odds that it's true, then the mere assertion of infinite dollars by people sending my grandpa letters makes sending in $30 the best option. Or at the very least, my dad and I should not have been trying to take away his infinite utility by interfering. So maybe we should have just deleted our mouths. Now, you might say, it's not 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds because the offer in the letter seems implausible. Okay, great. Now apply that realization to Christianity and we're more or less on the same page.
To put that in perspective, torturing someone for 1,000 years has a negative but finite utility. It doesn't even remotely compare to negative infinite utility. So if a YouTube channel tends to cause deconversions, then it promotes negative infinite utility. If I knew my YouTube channel tended to cause people to be tortured for thousands of years, I would delete it right away.
What if you thought your God was causing people to be tortured for thousands of years? Well, of course you couldn't delete him, but then you also can't delete my channel. Yet here you are, speaking out against it because of the negative utility it causes by leading people to be tortured, while remaining fairly silent about the role of the dude who actually engineered the torture. Why is this? Why are you so vocal about the channel as someone who might be unintentionally prompting people to make a decision of their own free will that will cause God to knowingly send them to hell? Even if you want to take the God doesn't send them to hell, they choose it themselves route, the choice was still theirs, and I would be a non-factor in a decision that was really between them and God. It seems like either you're irrationally zeroing in on the smallest contributor to this problem, or, I don't know, maybe just brazenly contriving an excuse for telling those you disagree with to shut up?
Thus, if a channel tends to cause deconversions, it should be wiped off the internet as soon as possible. That's all very interesting.
No, it's not.
But what about those objections we raised earlier? Will they stop this version of Pascal's wager? Well, no. Let's start with the many gods objection. This doesn't help the atheist out at all, but it can help out other religions, like, say, Islam. Muslims can continue trying to convert Christians just fine. They believe that their religion will lead people to paradise. So Muslims trying to convert Christians, or vice versa, are just individuals who are trying to improve the chances of the other at getting infinite utility. The atheist, on the other hand, is just trying to tear down everyone's chances at infinite utility.
I wonder if he thinks that my dad and I were just trying to tear down my grandpa's chances at infinite money. I wonder if he thinks only people who are offering him infinite cash payouts should have been able to speak to him about the issue. Because apparently a simple assertion of infinite reward should override all other concerns you might have about a situation, and only people who make those assertions should be able to express their opinions.
Now, what about the objection that you can't choose your beliefs? Well, that's obviously not a problem. The Christians, who would have otherwise been deconverted, already believe in Christianity. So you aren't being forced to choose a belief. What the atheist needs to choose is just clicking the delete channel button. That's totally something you could choose.
It's amazing, and creepy, how casually a Christian can treat a suggestion that everybody who opposes him should just delete their channels.
Now, what about the objection that wagering is immoral? Modifying it slightly for the new wager, an atheist might say, I'm obligated to tell people what I see as true and to promote truth. Thus my channel, which teaches the truth of atheism, should stay up, no matter what damage it causes.
Does he really think we believe our channels cause the damage he asserts it does? It sounds like he just can't, or doesn't want to, imagine anybody not operating according to the premises of his religion. Which is probably our core problem here.
Now, while it's true that there is a moral obligation to teach the truth, there's also a moral obligation to not decrease other people's utility.
But there's not a moral obligation to live according to every wild assertion about other people's utility that a religion has managed to put down on paper. In fact, I'd say that indiscriminately doing so is pretty irresponsible.
Take the example of Jim. Jim believes that the millionth digit of pi is 7. That's factually incorrect. But because of aliens or a mad scientist or whatever, it turns out that if you correct that belief, he'll be tortured for 1,000 years. In this case, it seems immoral, very immoral actually, to teach Jim the truth. So there are some times when the stakes can be so high that maximizing someone's utility takes precedence over teaching the truth. And the stakes are never higher than when infinite utility is on the line.
Yeah, but what if someone simply asserted that correcting the belief about the millionth digit of pi would lead to someone being tortured? Should we jump through hoops to adjust math just for that? After all, promoting truth is less important than helping people avoid torture. And by the way, the mad scientists or aliens are the true villains because they're the ones torturing people. Are you not troubled by where God falls in your analogy? But all that aside, let's make this real, here and now. As of this moment, I hereby assert that anybody who does any form of math correctly will be tortured forever by aliens, while anybody who only does incorrect math will be rewarded forever by the aliens. This means, by virtue of my assertion, there's no infinite utility for only doing incorrect math, right? Now I know this will make life suck from now on. Engineering's going to go right out the window. Builders won't be able to calculate measurements correctly, which means our houses will have to be simple or unstable, and grocery stores won't be able to charge you correct prices or even maintain accurate inventory. Basically, society will melt down. But hey, this is nothing compared to the infinite utility I asserted comes from only doing math wrong. So as of today, Apologetics Squared, do you not feel like you have an obligation to urge others not to do correct math? After all, that's the more moral choice, right? Since all of society should turn on a dime every time someone says there are infinite consequences or utility to something?
Now, would God reward wagering? Well, most Christians probably didn't convert under the pretense of a selfish utilization of Pascal's wager, but the broader point is that the atheist isn't the one who's wagering here, it's a Christian. We want to maximize the chance of our fellow human beings getting infinite utility. The atheist's best shot at that is deleting their channels. That's what they should focus on.
And since we're making demands based on assertions, you should focus on making sure you never teach anybody correct math since... Oh, never mind.
Let's throw in one bonus objection. There is some non-zero probability that only atheists will go to heaven because there could be an atheist-loving God or something. So, atheism overall promises infinite utility on average, just like Christianity. So bringing a Christian to atheism doesn't reduce their utility.
So, you'll take atheists seriously, but only if they join you in making wild, unfounded assertions? Either this is a silly, contrived justification for telling us to shut up, or you simply lack basic functional adult judgment.
Now, this logic breaks down. The problem is that if you go from a probability P1 of getting some good to a probability of P2 of getting that good, then the difference in utility is the product of P2 minus P1 and the utility of that good. So getting a Christian to become an atheist will still, on average, result in a net loss of infinite utility.
Not sure where he got the values for P1 and P2, or determined there's still a net loss of utility. It feels a little like he just rushed through it and hoped nobody would notice.
There is a way around this, which I'll call the escape. An atheist could maintain that an atheist-loving God, or some such atheist-preferring hypothesis, is actually more probable than Christianity. That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, because how do you calculate the probability of one totally unfounded paranormal assertion against another?
But it would justify not deleting a channel which promotes atheism. Anyways, that's the argument. Here it is more formally, so each step is clearly laid out. If you're an atheist with a channel that criticizes Christianity, then I would love to hear which premise of this argument you dispute.
The one where you assert there's an infinite reward for following Christianity. Look, we're almost at the end here, so I'm going to cut off before he goes into his closing, subscribe to my channel script. The actual argument here is really weird. Taken to its obvious logical conclusion, it would contend that conversation should be monopolized by whoever can make the most outlandish claims about the consequences of as many actions as possible, with the result being an incomprehensibly chaotic, endlessly shifting public discourse that keeps deferring to whatever newcomer is willing to up the ante by asserting implausibly severe punishments for more behaviors than the last person. But we all know that's not really what he's going for. In practice, this is just about demanding deference to his religion and silence from non-believers. holding a doctrinal assertion about eternal torture over our heads or the heads of others, while going so far as to literally suggest we should avoid getting to the bottom of truth if his religion insinuates truth is dangerous. This is straight up Dark Ages and I'm glad we live in a secular nation where the only tool he has for prompting us to shut down our channels is empty threats and nonsense arguments. Where this gets serious is when his flirtation with theocratic rhetoric gets into the ears of people who are better positioned than he is to bully atheists. This is a real problem that affects real people, many of whom reach out to me in desperation, asking what to do when they get punished, harassed, or ostracized for expressing anything that to any degree runs contrary to Christian teaching. This, unlike hell, is something we know people face, and it's rooted in the demand that everybody act according to the premises of Christianity regardless of whether they believe it and stay silent if they don't. Apologetics Squared is directly promoting this entitled dominionist mentality, and in doing so is contributing to the problem. And while I never offer any suggestion this means he should delete his channel, because that would be a garbage thing to do, I hope he's ready to shoulder responsibility for how he's encouraging people to see and act toward others. This program was made possible by a grant from John Adams, Bob Generic, Maggie Danger, S.R. Foxley, A Little Logic, Daniel Bostet, Nidemos, and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you'd like to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below.